Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, make sure that you check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server. We take ideas directly from it, communicate with us, other Heat fans, get away from Twitter during political season. Link is right here in the description. Again, $2.99 per month. Trust me, you'll sign up, get it acquainted with everybody there, you'll forget about it. So check it out. Well, you won't forget to go on it. You'll forget about the $2.99 a month. Well, we want you to anyway. Anyway, Off the Floor, link right here in the description. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Football season is upon us. As Brady and I are recording this, we're a few hours away from the Chiefs and the Ravens. Of course, the Dolphins play the Jags coming up on Sunday. I'll be there. We'll have coverage for Five Reasons Sports, but also we'll be promoting Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. They've got a great new promotion here in the state of Florida. Use that code FIVE, and you'll get on a $5 initial play, you get $50 to play with. That's right, 10-1. No questions asked. Play it on anything you want. 2 to 4 players across the spectrum of sports. PrizePicks.com. Sign up today. Code 5. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all band. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. We got Brady Hawk. You can follow him at Brady Hawk 305. Make sure you check out recent episodes. Greg and I will be getting back to the countdown. We've got 8 players left to go on our top 40. Of course, Sean has come on and skewered our list, but we're going to try to proceed anyway, even with our self-esteem seriously hurt at this stage. So we'll go on there and finish that. Also, Alex and I just did an episode about ESPN putting the Heat in the 4th tier in the Eastern Conference and sort of how we felt about that and what that means going forward. So make sure that you check that out as well. Brady and I today, though, are going to get into a topic based on something that I just sort of heard in passing, which is that the Miami Heat are entering this training camp, which, by the way, they announced today. We knew this was coming, but every other year they're allowed to go overseas. So last year, Boca is not overseas. It may feel like it, especially during early bird, where, it's sort of like entering a totally different space. I grew up in Boca, so I can say these kind of things. But they're not going to Boca this year. They're going to the Bahamas. They're going to the Baha Mar, which is where they went 2 years ago. Previous to that, they used to go to Atlantis. They are not going to Atlantis. The Sixers are going to Atlantis. The Heat have a deal with Baha Mar now. And so they will be there starting on the 30th. Media Day will be September 30th. We'll have full coverage from Miami. Brady, myself, Alex, and Alejandro, most likely. The 4 of us will be there all day. And then I'll be in the Bahamas, most likely. A little expensive, but I'll be in the Bahamas most likely with our guy Timothy Bain, who was our Bahamian correspondent. He was with me there 2 years ago, and they'll be there the entire week. They're going to be there from that the 30th all the way, I believe, until the 5th at the tail end of the week, and then they'll return and, of course, resume practices in Miami. But what I've heard is that entering this training camp, they have 2 starters, dos minutos, Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. And that everything else is up for grabs, that there's going to be competition. Now, there are clearly players who may have an inside track on one of those starting spots, namely Tyler Herro, who was a starter last year, possibly Terry Rozier. Duncan Robinson was a longtime starter for this team, has been. Nikola Jovic started a lot of games towards the end of last year at the 4. Haywood Highsmith has started a lot of games for this team. Khalil Ware is somebody that I think Heat fans want to start. And, of course, they don't have Caleb Martin anymore, but Jaime Jaquez is a player who could start. And we actually believe, I think, in the network, he's probably the player that's going to make the biggest pop, the biggest jump this season. So those are the players. So here's what I'm going to do. We put this on our Discord. Who would our fans like to see? Who would the fans like to see? They could be our fans, too. Some of them are not my fans. Who would they like to see join Jimmy and Bam in the starting lineup. And starting does not mean closing, by the way, which closing is what the Heat value more, but starting. Okay, so I'm going to throw some different three-man combinations at Brady, and he is going to give the positives and the negatives and the likelihood. Okay, positives, negatives, likelihood of these combinations. Tyler Herro, Terry Rozier, Nikola Jovic.
Very highly likely. That's what it feels like to me. I mean, that's just the idea of framing it as two starters makes sense, because if you're bringing your core players back and you don't have major changes, you want it to be competitive. You don't want it to be stale and where things just are stagnant and there's no movement. So you just want competition in camp. And they did it last year, or they even did it, I think, the last time they were in the Bahamas for training camp. And we talked about that before. It was when it was Depot. And they were trying to give him an opportunity to make his case for a starter, and obviously Tyler ended up winning it. It's the similar thing with Duncan. I mean, Duncan just came off a really good season, and I think it to some degree the people inside the Heat just want him to have a chance. Like, they just want him to fight for position. If he does earn it, he can get it. But ultimately, I mean, that's kind of the grouping. I mean, that's kind of the one from last year that I think is the easy answer, and it just comes down to some other guys beating guys out. But I think it's also for forgetting the backcourt, because I know we keep looking at the backcourt as like the main thing with the starters. But I think it's for the young guys like Jaime, Kel'el Ware even. Like, they want these guys to have something to strive for. So if it's like, okay, Nikola Jovic is our starting four, even though he's kind of the upside play as well, it's like, okay, we want guys like Jaime and some of these other players to really battle for a spot. Or even like a guy like Keyshawn Johnson. It's not going to be a starter, obviously, but I think to some degree they want these guys battling it out. So I mean, the pros to that lineup is that there is a lot of scoring opportunity there. If certain guys just across the board are able to kind of balance things out and take certain roles and be able to share the ball and play at that level. The issue with that lineup is what we're always going to come back to is defensively, there's just not a lot of trust there with switching. You're going to get hunted. You have Terry and Tyler that are going to get stuck on certain matchups, and it's going to be trouble. And it's going to get back to the same thing we talked about previous years, where it's Bam trying to cover everything up. So, that's kind of the easy answer, I guess. And I guess we can get weird with some other three-man combos, but I like the idea of making these guys compete in camp and not just handing everybody their jobs.
All right. So let's get into some of the problems with this unit. First thing, we didn't see it a whole lot last year. I know this is where they were kind of leaning after the Rozier trade, but Tyler was hurt, Terry was hurt. And so again, it wasn't something that we got, and then we got to the postseason. Rozier was hurt and Jimmy was hurt. So again, this group had logged very few minutes together. Problems: one, backcourt small, right? Particularly defensively. You don't have anybody to really cover up for them defensively, other than Bam, because you don't. And I'll get to another lineup in a second that you may be able to do this. Because you don't have one of those wing defenders like you had with Caleb or another guy we're going to mention in a second. It means that Jovic has to really grow defensively, right? We saw some of it in the second half of last year where he became a passable defender. At times he was a plus defender, but it's one thing to say, okay, you can put him in the starting lineup and not worry about him defensively. And it's another thing to say, if Terry and Tyler are getting beaten off the dribble all the time or just being out physical, that you're going to have Jovic on the back line as well as Bam to clean it up. This lineup feels to me like more of a problem defensively than offensively. I kind of feel like Tyler and Terry will figure out the your turn, my turn thing better than people think, but it's on the other end of the floor.
For sure.
So how do they go with this one?
There's just less flexibility with that group defensively than there's been in recent years. Even before, let's just say in the Kyle tenure, if they wanted to on certain nights, if Jimmy wanted to take the matchup of a really good guard, they could size down and put Kyle here and then size up Jovic on the right matchup where he could just kind of play in that corner. They can't really do that anymore. Jimmy has to guard the wings. He has to guard these other players where the guards have to guard the guards. This isn't also with Caleb. I know the other guy you're going to mention could kind of play into this, but not having Caleb guard some of those guards as well. It's Terry and Tyler that have to match up there and just guard their yard. And that's why I'm interested just to see the different coverages they run. And that's why I think a lot of people want to see the Ware factor, just because it gives them something different. it gives them an opportunity to put Bam in a way where he can roam and play his role, and it just gives them a way to like really protect the rim. And like, if you're not going to have an absolute strength defensively, at least have a big guy in there that can kind of deter shots at the rim. So that's kind of the deciding factor there, give you something different. But I agree. I think defensively is the thing there. I think offensively they can figure it out. Like I giving Spo an off season where he can figure out like a bunch of talented scorers and how to play them together. I think they can figure that out if healthy, if playing for a certain X amount of games consistently, they could figure that out. Defensively, though, it'll be weird. I just think a lot of teams in the East are bigger. Like they have a lot of wings now, like Paul George adding to Philly. New York added a bunch of wings. You have Boston, who's just a bunch of wings and just bigger players. Like a lot of these teams are not small guards you're going to be facing, so it's going to be some tough matchups. So they're going to have to play around with things. And the answer that they'll probably give, and Spo will probably give, is this: the starting lineup that they give in Game 1 probably won't be the starting lineup in Game 12. And not just because of injury, but I think matchup-wise, they might have to play around with it because this team, no matter where you flip it and talk about the talent of this team, they do have depth. Like they have a lot of guys who can potentially play. So there's no reason not to mix it in at certain points, even though, like, let's just say that because we say there's two starters. I don't know how you don't play a guy like the Tyler's the polarizing one because I think that people get debatable about the Duncan thing and the fit. But how do you not start Terry with the fact that you don't have another point guard on the roster? Like, I can't see a way that Terry could come off the bench because it just really feels like you're forcing things positionally. I don't know. I feel like Terry being the only point guard is kind of a given starter.
Well, and then you're asking Jimmy and Bam to do more of the handling. And now we're also saying that in this year, you're going to need Jimmy to defend more. We're saying a lot of Jimmy needs to do this and Jimmy needs to do that. We don't even know what mind frame Jimmy's coming to camp in. Let me make one sub of this group. So, I hinted at it. Take Jovic out, put Highsmith in. Herro, Rozier, Herro, and then Highsmith up front. Now you're small again, right?
You're small, but it's the small that Spo usually leans toward. It's the small that he can trust, where he has a direction he can go, where you can at least size around and switch a little bit more and trust it because they can cover up with Haywood, Jimmy, and Bam. That feels more like the closing lineup, though, than the starting lineup. Like, I think they can get away with the other stuff to start games, but closing-wise, it's going to be a version of that. Like, I really do think Haywood's going to close a ton of games this year. And I know we said that about Jaime as well, but I think Haywood is just somebody that Spo trusts. And just like he trusted Caleb, I just think defensively he's really going to be big for them down the stretch. But starting wise, I don't know. It's tough. If we're Miami's in a tier that we're projecting them to be in, I don't know how you don't start any of your young, like high upside guys. Like how do you bring Jaime, Jovic, or like all these guys coming off the bench? Like if you're in this certain tier and you need to make a jump, you have to unleash your guys that can move you in that direction. So starting wise, I think it has to be. I don't think it's going to be a Haywood type. I think he's kind of glued to that bench role where you can kind of make things work, and it's going to be one of these young guys.
All right, so let me make another sub out of here. You said you don't see how you don't start Terry, but let's not start Terry. Let's go Tyler, Duncan, Highsmith.
I mean, the no point guard thing hurts. Like if you're not going to run a point guard, I think you have to start Jovic. Just if you're going to unleash him in that way and play the that type of style, you have to play him. So that is a weird lineup, to be honest, because I don't really know offensively what their direction would be. Like it feels like it would be a little repetitive in the front court and the back court. So I don't know how much I love that one. I can see them going to that lineup at certain points of the game, but I just don't think that's a starting lineup type group.
Well, I guess the question becomes this, okay? We keep coming back to the same themes here, which is the Herro Rozier backcourt going to work? And if we don't think it's going to work, at least not for long stretches of the game, maybe as a starting group, maybe more likely as a closing group, then you have to say, okay, who are you putting in there? And so then, the natural guy becomes Duncan because of the comfort level with Bam and because of how well he's played and how well they've played with him starting. So I'll do this. Rozier, Robinson, Jovic.
I mean, that's the one I think everybody's going to point to and say, like, on paper, that just kind of puts everybody in their exact role. And that's kind of always been the point. It's like, do you lean the pure talent version that you know what you're going to get from Tyler? Or do you lean in the role where you kind of put everybody in their position and Duncan doesn't really need the ball, Terry can find his flow, and Jimmy and Bam can do their thing. So I think that one's the only one that really rivals it, just because I think that just the positional stuff on paper and offensively there's enough pop there. And the reason why the reason why I like that lineup a decent bit is because the bench group becomes very intriguing at that point, because then you have Tyler, Jaime, Haywood, and let's just say Khalil that he pops, like, or whoever you want to put in there as a backup big. But Tyler, Jaime, and Haywood is a really strong bench.
It's a really good bench. Yeah,
like,
it is.
I don't know how you really compete with that. That's some insane pop from your second unit. So if your starting lineup is serviceable and that starting lineup we're talking about is decent enough, it's a pretty good rotation. So that's always going to be.
You still have Josh there, right? And you still have Burks there, and you still have Love there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's another thing. It could be Love over Ware. It just there's a lot more that I feel like you can go to with that group. I mean, the problem becomes what you've talked about here is if you're not going to start Terry, then you're asking somebody to essentially play de facto point guard. So we're talking about Tyler, or you're running a lot of actions through Duncan, but like you're basically asking Tyler, Bam, and Jimmy to initiate quite a bit. I know they don't run it. We've done this episode before. They don't run a traditional point guard system, but it just feels like you got Terry in part to do some of that, right? And so if you're not starting, I don't know. That's where I come down on this, and I know where fans are going to come down as well. If you don't start Tyler, then that's the easy way to start Rozier and still get the spacing out there with Duncan. After the break, I'm going to ask this: we're going to throw out a couple more crazy combinations, including ones with Jaquez. Like, is there any way to create a good starting lineup with Tyler in it? And that's not disrespect to Tyler, but it's just the way that the rest of the group plays out. But before we do, and I've got you pensive there thinking about it, so we'll get to this after the break. Want to tell you about another great sponsor. Got a lot of stuff going on with them. Okay, Better Edge. That's with an O in it. BetterEdge.com. Use the code 5RSN. That's the code 5RSN. You get $20 to play. You can play every day. The benefit to Better Edge, as opposed to the other legal sports books, is that there's no VIG, which means you're not giving away money for nothing to the book. They don't do anything for you. Then they're just taking your cash. They don't do that at Better Edge. And it's a sports betting marketplace, so you can find the line you want. But also, we've got contests. Our guy, Sean Rochester, runs a ton of contests there. He's doing this all day long. Contest. NFL contests. We've got a Dolphins-Bills contest coming up. Why do I keep saying Bills? Dolphins-Jaguars contest coming up on Sunday at 1 o'clock. So make sure that you get in that one as well. Be giving away shirts. One of the contests, you also you put in $5, you can win the entire pot. So check it out. BetterEdge.com. Use the code 5RSN and just try it today. All right, let's start with my question regarding Tyler before we get to the next part of this. What is the best possible lineup they can put out there with Tyler in it that balances the roster and the rotation?
Well, it all comes down to, we keep coming back to it, but it really does come down to the way that Tyler and Terry look together over a long period of time. So it's to some degree, I mean, the best backcourt mate for him is Terry when you go down the roster. And in some ways, like if I think about the four for them, like Haywood, we went through both the lineup cases, but I think he actually plays better with Jovic just because of the speed that they played at. Like I actually liked his two-man lineups with Jovic last year. Just when Jovic kind of puts his head down and Tyler likes to drift on the fast breaks and he likes to make that kick out when he puts his head down. Like I like the combinations there that in some ways I do kind of like that pairing. But if we're going to play devil's advocate as well, in some ways Tyler's best lineups isn't with the best players on the floor. It's a lot of times when he can really just play his game kind of like he did in that Boston series where it's like him and one other guy and he can just play the pocket pass, play his role, get into his shots, get into his pull-up, where as the starting lineup, he's got to play more into that spot-up stuff that we keep talking about. He's a 41% spot-up shooter, and I like that game for him. But as much as everybody tries to push him in that direction, he's more than that. He's more than a catch and shoot player. That's what he's become. So in some ways, some of these lineups fit him better when he is going to be playing with like the Jaquez Haywood grouping. And I think that's why a lot of people kind of point in the direction of going in a different direction with the starting lineup. It's not because he's not talented. It's because he's actually really talented. And then he can lean in his own lineups. And he's a really decent, good half-court scorer that he can play in his own lineup. So that's kind of the balance here. It's like, it's not a knock on him. It's actually the opposite. It's like, this guy's a really good scorer, and we don't want him to just be a specialist. If we want somebody to be a specialist, we're just going to put Duncan in there because that's what he is. So there's some decisions to be made. But look, all this can be thrown out the window if Terry and Tyler just kind of look decently seamless, where they kind of are balancing things out. And I think to some degree, as much as we've hyped up certain things Terry's going to do, I don't think he's going to get an insane amount of shots up. Like, I think he's going to play his game, but I don't think his shot distribution is going to be through the roof where he's taking shots away from guys like.
But he needs to take bad. The thing with Terry is he needs to take bad shots, like because sometimes he's a bad shot maker, right? Like that is, and we saw that last year. And he's a rhythm shooter, and he got off to a horrible start shooting with them last year, and then he was on fire for a couple of weeks, making a ton of shots down the stretch. And I just part of this is too. It's unfair to Tyler in a lot of ways because, like you said, it's because he's so good at doing some other things and has done it at the highest level. You win 6th Man of the Year, you can handle that job. I mean, obviously, you were the best at it for a whole season. But I also wonder, like, if Terry and Tyler get things together, like, what's Jimmy doing? Because you don't want Jimmy drifting, because that's one of the concerns after last season. And you also don't want Bam not getting fed, because we don't want I don't want to have that podcast. I feel that podcast coming. Like November 13th, like what happened to the Bam of the summer? And because again, they're not getting it to him enough. I mean, these are all sort of PTSD things that we've had with this team where we keep doing these same pods over and over because of the roster construction issue where it doesn't seem like it's a perfect fit. I just, again, I wonder, like, how you can tell Tyler in the starting lineup, we want you to be a complementary piece, a spot-up shooter, run off of screens, do that kind of stuff. If Jimmy is not going to take the reins offensively during the regular season, because then it's unfair to Tyler, and it becomes like, it's what I said at the beginning of the season with Tyler last year. Tyler did it in part because Jimmy wasn't. Jimmy, like, there were games it's like, okay, Jimmy's not here to play tonight, and then it's, okay, so Tyler, and then people are getting upset if Tyler's inefficient. But somebody had to do it. Now, they didn't have Terry at that point. All right, I want to switch to something else because there's a couple players we haven't injected into the mix here. What is the best possible lineup that has Jaime Jaquez in it?
That's the tough one. I mean, the question becomes, is he more of a 2 or a 4 to you? And I think a lot of people want him to be a 2. And I think in Spo's head, if he's going to put him in a lineup, it's going to be at the 4.
4, right.
So best
Apologies
possible,
yeah,
best possible lineup would probably be if he's shooting at the level that he wants to be shooting at, that he talked about, you could make the case that you could put him at the 2, and you just go full youth and go Jovic and Jaquez in there, maybe. I don't know, but I think you can't do with Terry probably. That's probably like the youthful play, but then you're doing Tyler dunking off the bench, and I think things get repetitive.
No.
And I don't think you could do Terry, Tyler, and Jaime because you need to stagger. You cannot have all these your 5 highest points per game scores in the starting lineup. Like that's never made sense for this team. So it does become difficult to work in Jaime. I think like that's kind of the conclusion, because it just feels like the Jimmy repetitiveness is almost similar to like. I said it all the time last year. I didn't really love the Caleb Jaime lineups just because they were doing similar things. Yeah. It didn't make sense to me. And I think if you're going to put him – so he got off of that. You got rid of Caleb, and now you open things up for Jaime. And then you put him in a starting lineup with Jimmy to do the same thing except on a greater level. I just don't love that for him. I think he's better off being the pop off the bench. I think he's better off being kind of a somewhat number 1 or 2 option in some of these lineups. Like I think they can really look for him in a lot of these second unit lineups. So – starting lineup wise, I think it would be a little repetitive. I think here, I'll say this though. If you were to start Jaime, you would start Duncan, right? Like I think they play well together. And if you're going to start Jaime, let's say at the 4.
You're starting Jaime at the 4, right? So you're starting Duncan, Rozier, and Jaime?
That would probably be the lineup that would make most sense for him. But I don't think it would make the most sense for the team.
Right. Well, see, that's the crazy part about this is the best chance for a player to pop is to be the sixth man. Right? Like, Tyler probably will score more points per game as a sixth man than he would as a starting two. In the way that this team is constructed. And you can make the same argument for Jaquez. I mean, I've made the argument that Jaquez's points per game is going to jump because Jimmy's going to miss time, and then you're going to end up. See, that's where Jaime's going to get his starts, right?
Right,
Most
exactly.
part.
That's the role he's going to play.
He's going to start for Jimmy in those games, and they're going to run through him. And then, their success level in those games may ultimately determine what they do at the trade deadline or what they do at the end of the season. Because if they're winning games with Jaime sliding in there for him, then it makes certain decisions, I don't know if you want to say more interesting or easier, one or the other. Let me throw this one in there. There are fans who want Khalil, where to start. I don't see it happening. I don't know. I don't think it doesn't matter what kind of camp he has. I don't think Spo's I don't think they're transitioning to this total refresh. I know they want to call it rebuild, but refresh, reload, whatever you want to call it, right away with the young players. They're mixing in the young players. There's a difference between mixing them in and starting all of them at first, and then it's a total different way to play if you're playing Ware next to Bam. But if they did it, which also means, by the way, Heat fans are funny because they wanted Jovic to start the entire season, and now it's like, oh, start Ware, bring Jovic off the bench. But if they started Ware with Bam, what is the group?
100% to me, it's Terry and Tyler. I think because all the problems that we talked about at the beginning of this podcast with those lineups, it covers a lot of it up because at that point, you can play drop and deter the rim. Bam can play weak side, and you can kind of have just so many more defensive coverages with that front court. And I think if Jovic is off the bench, that's kind of your backup point guard to a degree. And that's also, I think, a lot of that's where this gets interesting as well. I think once again, lineups don't always matter because they're going to stagger and they could do different things. But like Jovic off the bench would mean that he would be kind of the backup point guard for that unit with Duncan, Jaime, and Hayward. So it would be like a pretty youthful group as well that could just play off each other in that way. That the roles don't feel repetitive off the bench, like if that was the case. And Terry and Tyler would be able to play their game. They would be able to play off screens and play the pick and roll game. Like they would lean heavily into pick and roll basketball if they ran that lineup out. And defensively, it all revolves around how Ware would look. Like if Ware came out and was like a defensive beast and drop in camp, and it was like, okay, we can really if we can lean in the defensive direction with this guy, 100% you do it. But I don't know if it's going to be at that point. Like this training camp, I just don't think it's going to be at that point where they're like, okay, we can fully lean on Khalil Ware as our like defensive anchor and drop at the 5 to make everybody else's life easier. That's a lot to put on a rookie. That's a lot to like put everything on him defensively. Even though Bam's the anchor and he's probably he's the best defender in the league, he's kind of the guy that would have to be the glue to make it all work because he's the 5. I keep comparing it to Brook Lopez and Giannis in Milwaukee because Brook made it work for Giannis because he mastered his role. If Khalil mastered his role, you could do it. So, I mean, that would be a fun lineup though. Like that would be because I mean, the whole idea here, I say it all the time, but like they just need something new. They can't keep running out these same lineups, and that would give some life. It was like, okay, we have Terry and Tyler, we have a dynamic scoring backcourt that can just get buckets, and we have size. We have size down low. We have guys that can do it. Just gives you something different. So that would be a very good case scenario of where it could come into his own in camp.
All right, final question. And again, check out our sponsors. PrizePicks, use the code 5 FIVE. Better Edge, use the code 5 RSN. How do you think the decision is made? Is the decision made by Spo based on our third starter is, let's say Tyler comes out, has a great camp, and Spo is just like, you know what? He's our guy. He's been our starting 2 guard. Pat said it flat out. Tyler's a starter. Okay, and then it's not what I'm hearing now necessarily, and it's not the way they're framing camp, but that's been the way the past couple of seasons. So is it okay? This is our third starter. Now let's go find the players that fit best around those 3, or is it okay? Sort of what you're talking about, which is we're going to take like a 3-man group here. So it's we want to get a look at something fresh. We like the idea of Ware there. We can play Tyler and Terry together in the starting lineup because we can protect them defensively. Which approach do you think it is?
I think the front court piece is the piece that they're just going to find fit wise, where it's like, okay, Tyler had a great camp. Terry's had a good camp, and he's kind of our only point guard on the roster. It's inevitable. That's our starting backcourt. And then I think at that point it becomes, okay, what makes the most sense around, as much as we've been doing this whole podcast around the 2 starters, I think at that point it becomes around the 4 starters. And they say to themselves, we need size because a lot of these teams in the East sized up. We're just going to have to bank on the fact that we need the upside play. We're just going to bank on the same lineup as last year. After this whole podcast of going through combinations, it ends up right at point 1, and it's going to end up with Jovic, Terry, and Tyler. Like, I do think that's probably the exercise.
It's going to end up with Highsmith closing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's.
And then there's going to be opportunity for a guy like Jaime even to close. Like the closing lineup, we say this all the time, I think could be interesting, and it depends on the games and stuff. The starting lineup, I don't think they're giving the thought into the starting lineup as much as we think they are. Like the starting lineup, they have to lay it out there. But I think most of the thought process is going into after the fact, into the start and into the middle, like into like the meat of the game. Like I think that certain combinations that work. The combinations are kind of the stuff that matters. The start of the game is just to kick things off so you can kind of flow into those combinations. And I guess the back end of the rotation will kind of – honestly, that's kind of the key here too, and I'll just end here. The back end of the rotation, the guys that fill into like the 8, 9, 10 spots probably will decide a lot of the lineups too. Because if Ware doesn't have a great camp and it ends up being Kevin Love – they have to lean in other directions, and they can't play certain lineups. Like
or Burks shoots the cover off the ball in camp, and Spo is like, okay, this is my new Wayne Ellington, and Alec, take 8 threes, in your minutes, which is I think could happen because honestly, if you look at his numbers, they've done more with less in terms of 3-point shooting, and they did pass on. Some significant guys who ended up falling to the minimum, like a Tyus Jones, like some of the others. They signed with that spot. I think they're going to try to justify that pickup, which I have no problem with the pickup. The way he filled in, in that for the Knicks when everybody was hurt in the playoffs, and he has a record of being a 40+% 3-point shooter. And I do think Spo's going to be like, okay, wait, we're going to play the guy who can stretch the floor here a little bit. So. You're right. And then Josh is going to get minutes because he's Josh, and Spo's going to lean on him certain times. And if he's the Josh that we started to see like the 2-3 weeks before he hurt the shoulder, then he's a playable player for them in this rotation. I thought early in the season last year he wasn't, but as the year went on, he was. So we'll see how it works out. But it's going to be interesting in camp. I will say that. I know that they don't care about the starting lineup. The fans do. That's what's going to get the attention. Because we're not going to get to see the closing lineup in camp, right? You're not really closing games or important games. And so it's going to be, okay, who are the first 5 on the floor, so to speak? And then that white, the charity game they have, was it the red, white, and pink game? That it's going to be interesting to see that one too, because I know they shuffle the lineups, but typically Spo will put out something representative at the very beginning of the game. All right. Thanks to Brady. Check out the other episodes on the 5 Reasons Sports Network and of 5 on the Floor. Prize Picks, use the code 5 FIVE. Better Edge 5 RSN. Have a good one, everybody.